All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in. We are on the precipice of the fantasy football playoffs, and without fail, each and every year, you have these deep sleeper players crawl out of the woodworks and deliver you this immaculate stretch run of 3 to 4 fantasy games, perfectly coinciding with the playoff run and delivering you championships out of nowhere. So today we're going to try to identify a few of those players that weren't even thought of in the same breath of the players being drafted all the way back in August. And if you have an open spot at the end of your bench, you can stash a couple of these guys who have a very slight chance into turning into league winners. So as always, like the video, comment down below if you have any particular sleepers that you're rostering on the end of your bench. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and I'm going to go ahead and cue that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. Today we're taking a deep dive into some waiver wire warriors that can deliver some pretty incredible fantasy performances over the next few weeks that are going to be crucial to securing the championship of your fantasy league. It happens each and every year. I mean, last year we had guys like Jerick McKinnon and Zay Jones crawl out of the woodwork and deliver people championships. Amon-Ra St. Brown from a couple years ago. It always happens. And I do want to put out the disclaimer that the guys I'm talking about in this video are not guys I'm telling you to start in week 13 or week 14. These are guys that if the cards break right for them, that it's good that you'll have them sitting on the end of your bench, and then you can immediately don't have to worry about clamoring at the waiver wire. You have them already. You can put them in if their number comes up, and they can ultimately deliver you some performances, again, if things break right. So again, these are sleepers, these are stashes, not immediate starts. And it should be said, there are going to be some more obvious fantasy football championship wonders, waiver wire wonders. We're talking about guys like Zach Moss and Chuba Hubbard, but those guys are mostly rostered across leagues right now as we head into week 14, into week 14. The big waiver wire pickup with the Ramondre Stevenson injury is going to be Ezekiel Elliott. So if you need a running back, you should definitely be trying to spend, frankly, the rest of your fab at this point should be dumped into picking up Ezekiel Elliott. But those are all guys that are pretty consensus across the fantasy landscape, guys that are going to be rostered or going to be highly rostered after this coming waiver wire period. These are guys that we're going to talk about. We have 4 running backs and 3 wide receivers, all of which are available in more than 75% of leagues, according to the Sleeper app. That, again, if things tend to break right, and just based off of some analysis of the past few games, the way things are trending, that they could step into a larger role in their respective teams and deliver you some great fantasy performances. And whether this is from injury, handcuffs, to players who are just developing a larger role in their offense, or just the team has given up and they're going to go in and throw in their backup players, and you just get a bunch of garbage yards, and it doesn't mean anything for the NFL, but guess what? It fills up the stat sheet and therefore fills up your fantasy points in whatever app you're using. So, there's a ton of different ways to generate fantasy success, and these are guys that I see that have a palpable path to generating them that are not probably commonly rostered across your leagues. So with all those disclaimers out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about our first guy, going to be the current backup running back for the Los Angeles Chargers. That is going to be Joshua Kelly. Doesn't even come up when you type. You have to type out his full last name on ESPN before he pops up. And there's a lot of things that I like about Joshua Kelly. Granted, a lot of people have a sour taste in their mouth about Joshua Kelly when Austin Eckler went down in week 1 and he had to fill in for that backup stretch from week 1 till week 6. It was a pretty putrid performance, but on the other hand, there have been some moments of brilliance throughout the season that gives me credibility that he's not going to come out and blow anyone away, but he should have enough usage to be a viable fantasy option. And we should start there. We should talk about him backing up Austin Eckler, because this is something that could very likely be occurring in the next few weeks. Austin Eckler, whether he has some underlying injury that we're not being disclosed to by the Los Angeles Chargers, whether it's just him being on the older side of a running back, there is something that is happening to Austin Eckler, and he does not look like the Austin Eckler of even last year. He is wildly inefficient. He is averaging less than 2.2 yards per carry. It is just really rough looking at Austin Eckler right now. And we saw that from week 12 to week 13, we saw Austin Eckler, whether it's from injury, whether it's from inefficiency, doesn't matter. We saw his role in this offense greatly reduced. He went from 80% snap share down to 53% snap share. And Josh Kelly, on the other hand, from week 12 to week 13, he went from 20% snap share all the way up to 47% snap share. And in those 47%, while splitting the backfield with Austin Eckler, he had 10 total opportunities. So if things tend to progress in this direction, or if we have another pop-up injury, again, we know Austin Eckler is not immune to injuries. Something pops up. Joshua Kelly is a guy that I am definitely putting at the end of my roster in case something happens and he has to step up to be that lead RB1 role. Again, we know the Los Angeles Chargers, the skill position players for that team are valuable. And yes, while coming into the 2023 season, it might have looked like a crowded skill position room, but we have, again, Austin Eckler dealing with whatever he's dealing with. Mike Williams, obviously out for the season. Quentin Johnston just isn't it as a rookie, and I don't think he's going to be a late season resurgence. Spoiler alert, Quentin Johnston is not one of the wide receivers I'll be talking about like in the name or the same vein of Amon-Ra a couple years ago. Quentin Johnston just isn't going to be a large part of this offense for at least the rest of the 2023 season. Keenan Allen has been dealing with a couple injuries here and there. He's obviously playing through injury, but you saw it did hamper him down the past couple weeks. So yeah, with all of these injuries, someone has to step up in this offense. And with his increase in volume and opportunities in snap share over the past few weeks, Joshua Kelly is a guy that come week 14, week 15, week 16, a la Justin Jackson 2 years ago, could be a league winner. Moving on to one that's probably not as needing in-depth analysis, it's going to be Elijah Mitchell, backup running back for the San Francisco 49ers. This one's really, really simple. Again, we know Christian McCaffrey. He is no stranger to the injury bug. And again, he is... he's looked strong, and we're going to knock on wood because, we support players here. We don't want them to get injured. We never wish ill or injury upon a player. But with Christian McCaffrey's injury history, it's always something that has to be looked at. I mean, we even saw Olivia Culpo, his girlfriend, posted a video on TikTok, and it just shows like how beat up, all the bruising his body has taken. That man looks like he was thrown in the back of a cement mixer. He's going through it right now, and he's obviously playing through a couple injuries. So we'll see if that has any lingering effect or if that pops up, It could pop up any given Sunday. And Kyle Shanahan has come out and made it very, very clear that Elijah Mitchell is the backup running back for the San Francisco 49ers. If something does happen to Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell will be the man. And we know that the running back position, or the lead running back position for the San Francisco 49ers, is by far and away one of the most valuable positions in fantasy football. So stashing him at the end of the bench is probably a great handcuff to have heading into weeks 14 and beyond. Another backup running back that I really, really like is going to be Rico Dowdle, backup running back for the Dallas Cowboys. And listen, it wasn't unlike Joshua Kelly. Rico Dowdle, he doesn't have the recent production to justify that maybe his role is going to be increasing, or maybe there's something wrong with Tony Pollard. In fact, it's been the exact opposite. Tony Pollard, over the past 2 games, seems to have come out of a lull and is performing better. However, it cannot be ignored that Rico Dowdle has established himself as a vital part of this Dallas Cowboys offense. He did get 6 total opportunities in week 13, but the reason why I like Rico Dowdle so much is he is the third down back. And the same way that we saw Tony Pollard kind of vault over Ezekiel Elliott in 2022, I think it's not, again, I'm not predicting this, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that Rico Dowdle could do the same to Tony Pollard. He just passes the eye test. He has the juice. And when it comes to actual usage in the Dallas Cowboys offense, Rico Dowdle comes in as the third down back, and he is the better pass blocker of the two. Obviously, he's a little bit bigger, a little bit more thicker than Tony Pollard, and excels in that role a little bit more. So when we look at the Dallas Cowboys upcoming schedule, it's going to be against the Eagles, the Bills, and the Dolphins. All 3 games which I expect to be very high scoring, all 3 of which I expect to hit the over, and all 3 of which I think is going to be relying more on the pass. I think you could see, yes, Tony Pollard was heavily utilized against the Giants and the Carolina Panthers and the Seattle Seahawks, because they all were games that were expected to be blowouts. They were all games in which you would hope that by the third quarter, obviously the Seattle Seahawks, it was a little different, but with the Panthers and the Giants, these were all games in which you expected him to come in, Cowboys very handily grab the lead by the third quarter, and then just use Tony Pollard and Rico Dowdle to run out the clock. But when you look into more of passing down sets, more competitive games, you do see Rico Dowdle's snap share increase a little bit. So over the stretch run, of the Eagles, Bills, and Dolphins, I think Rico Dowdle could be a very, very deep stash that could produce, and especially if as Tony Pollard happens to go down with injury. We saw him get injured at the end of last season, so not totally out of the question, but Rico Dowdle would be the guy to step up and take over that large volume that Tony Pollard has shouldered so far through the 2023 season. Moving on to our fourth running back I want to discuss here. That should be stashed at the end of your bench. It's going to be Kenneth Gainwell, the backup running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I kind of view him similarly to Rico Dowdle. You'll hear me parrot a lot of the same things that I said about Rico with Kenneth Gainwell. But, it's come out. We know there's a lot of running backs on this roster coming into 2023, whether it was Rashad Penny, who they signed. Boston Scott, who they re-signed. Kenneth Gainwell, obviously coming in his third year in the league. You have DeAndre Swift, who they traded for from the Giants. So, a lot of people were speculating who is going to be. But after game 3 of the NFL season, it kind of fell into place, and you saw DeAndre Swift take the lead role of his backfield, and Kenneth Gainwell slot in very nicely in the backup role. So let's talk about the obvious. DeAndre Swift, no stranger to injuries in his career, and that's always going to be a concern. We saw him take a massive hit in Week 13 against the San Francisco 49ers, so he might be dealing with lingering injuries. He was a limited participant in practice on Tuesday, so we need to be mindful that if something happens and either his snap share is limited or DeAndre Swift misses the game in Week 13, Kenneth Gainwell will be the guy to step up. And, the same way we talk about how the running back for the San Francisco 49ers is a valuable fantasy asset. That's the same breath that we talk about with the Philadelphia Eagles. They have one of the best, if not the best, offensive line in the NFL, and we see just how productive some of these, I don't want to say average running backs are, but we saw the decrease in production from Miles Sanders when he left the Eagles system, and what he's been doing so far, or the lack of what he's been doing so far with the Carolina Panthers. We've seen, how great DeAndre Swift was, how explosive and how outperforming expectations he has been behind the Philadelphia Eagles after transferring over from the Detroit Lions. So obviously, whoever's going to be that running back is going to be someone who you want to roster and start in fantasy football. Also, in the same breath we talk about with Rico Dowdle, we have to actually analyze the type of games that the Eagles are going to be playing in. So when you look at games that are more competitive, that are higher scoring, and the scores end up being closer, Kenneth Gainwell has a higher snap share. In Week 6 versus the Jets, which is the first loss of the season for the Eagles, he was over 41% of the snap share, his first time over 40% since Week 1. In Week 9 versus the Cowboys, he was at 97%, which is a very competitive game all the way up until the very last play of the game. Week 13 versus 49ers, Kenneth Gainwell was on the field for 54% of snaps and outsnapped DeAndre Swift by 12%. Whether this was injury or whether this was game script, it was very telling that in these types of high-scoring games that Kenneth Gainwell was the preferred back on the field. Also, when we talk about a passing down back and passing work for the running back position, Kenneth Gainwell is that guy. Obviously, you see with the first touchdown the Eagles scored against the San Francisco 49ers, he is going to be a guy that you expect to be out there. DeAndre Swift, maybe not the best as a run blocker. And when you talk about being out there on third downs, especially in passing sets or taking dump offs, DeAndre Swift isn't really the guy that's going to, get those dump offs or check downs out of the backfield from Jalen Hurts. So we have to look at the game scripts of the upcoming games. Next week, they're going to be playing the Cowboys and then the Seahawks after that. These are two games that should be much, much more competitive. And given the stoutness of both of those two teams' defensive lines, I expect Kenneth Gainwell to be utilized more in the passing game than DeAndre Swift will. And especially if we see any of those lingering injuries from the 49ers game, Kenneth Gainwell could deliver a very solid fantasy performance during the playoffs. All right, moving over to some wide receivers that I think, I like these running backs a lot. The path for them to be productive for fantasy football is a little bit more clear, especially with how injury-prone running backs have been in the 2023 season. And just, the more committee-esque approach a lot of the offensive schemes have taken to playing these running backs. But if you need wide receivers, there are some deep guys at deep options at wide receiver that I like as well. The first guy is going to be Khalil Shakir from the Buffalo Bills. He is slowly getting more involved in this Buffalo Bills offense. Just the trend of his snap share, targets, receptions, production has just been a very clear, linear upward trajectory over the entire 2023 season. And then 5 weeks ago, it just skyrocketed. So, for the through the first 7 weeks of the Buffalo Bills season, his average snap share was 20%, and he was only over 25%, I believe, 2 times in that time span. And he only had 1 target in each of the first 7 games of the season. Over the last 4 weeks, his snap share is as follows: 71%, 76%, 74%, and 80%. And over those past 4 weeks, he's averaging 5 targets. Obviously, much more involved in this offense. And even with, especially want to highlight when they fired when the Buffalo Bills fired Ken Dorsey, it seemed that even the snaps on which Khalil Shakir was being utilized in, he was on the field for much more meaningful snaps. He was getting more meaningful targets. He was being used as a downfield threat in conjunction with Gabe Davis. So if something happens, we know the volatility of Gabe Davis. We know that as the Bills play, they play the Chiefs coming up. So a lot of high scoring games here for the Bills. I think Khalil Shakir, if you are in desperate need of a wide receiver stash, he's a guy that I would probably be keeping on the end of my bench. Maybe more given that, you have Dalton Kincaid stepping up. You have a Gabe Davis who's really volatile and unpredictable. Khalil Shakir might be more of a dart throw DFS play, but if something happens with Stephon Diggs or if Gabe Davis is out with an injury, Khalil Shakir is a guy that I think could slot really, really nicely in as a deep shot on wide receiver. Moving into a guy that we're just going to rehash from last year, and that's going to be Zay Jones. Obviously, currently was the wide receiver 3 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but currently looks like the wide receiver 2 after the Monday night game against Cincinnati Bengals. Christian Kirk goes out with a groin injury, and we know groins, they are a very fickle injury to deal with in the NFL. They tend to linger. I don't know if Christian Kirk will be able to come back right away. Those are things that tend to take 1 to 2 weeks to recover from. And even when they get back on the field, there is, I believe, a 28% chance of re-injury first game back, and production is down generally 60 to 70% in that first game back with a limited snap share. So Christian Kirk, despite him being very involved so far this season, he is a guy that, unfortunately, as it pertains to fantasy playoffs, probably going to be irrelevant so far, and there's going to be a much bigger role for Zay Jones. Evan Ingram to a degree, but Zay Jones definitely will need to be stepping up for this Jacksonville offense going forward. And I know we're going to just address the elephant in the room with the Trevor Lawrence injury. Obviously, with CJ Beathard coming in to be the quarterback, it does hamper and provide a little bit of red flag around Zay Jones' value. However, the report came out today that the high ankle sprain for Trevor Lawrence, despite him looking really, really bad on the field Monday night, the ankle sprain came back as a grade 1, or it was a low graded high ankle sprain, and his status for week 14 is currently questionable, and he might be able to play. So obviously, hopefully Trevor Lawrence can come back sooner rather than later. But apart from analyzing the pros of the injury to Christian Kirk and the cons of the injury to Trevor Lawrence, this is just a guy that seems to be a really crucial cog to the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. There's a lot of concerns around the Jacksonville Jaguars. They just weren't putting up a ton of points. They were winning very, very ugly until Zay Jones came back to the offense 3 weeks ago. The offense looks radically different. You've seen it's been coincided with Trevor Lawrence returning to as a top 5 quarterback for fantasy. It coincided with a bunch of monster, almost 30-point games for Calvin Ridley. And over the past 3 games for Jacksonville Jaguars, they have gone 31 points, 24 points, 31 points, averaging much more points than they did through the first 11 weeks of the season. I understand there's difference between correlation and causation, and there's probably a bunch of other factors like the type of teams they're playing. Houston Texans, not a great passing defense. Tennessee Titans, even worse pass defense. But the 3-game sample size cannot be ignored, and we do have to remember what Zay Jones did last year when it came to the fantasy playoffs. He could be in line to do that yet again, and he's a guy that's just out there chilling on waiver wires. And hopefully for Zay Jones, you really want to hope that Trevor Lawrence is back, because despite how good Christian Kirk has been, despite the recent just absolute tear that Calvin Ridley has been on, Zay Jones seems to have that guy. Him, Trevor Lawrence, they seem to be on the same page. They seem to have a good connection. And with some of the absences, especially with Christian Kirk, and if Trevor Lawrence can get back on the field, could be another amazing playoff run for Zay Jones for fantasy football. Last guy I want to talk about here is going to be Rashad Bateman for the Baltimore Ravens. So Mark Andrews, he's out for the season, that opens up a ton of opportunities, because not only is Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in the NFL, but he is obviously the #1 passing option for the Baltimore Ravens. So it opens up a ton of targets to be spread around. And so you think, okay, yeah, obviously Zay Flowers benefits from this. We saw in week 1 when Mark Andrews missed with the first game of the season with a hamstring injury, Zay Flowers as a rookie had 10 targets, which is nearly unheard of for a rookie in the first game of the NFL. But it doesn't mean that you can't have another wide receiver come in and, have an incredible or at least decent fantasy performance, especially in an offense as dynamic as the Baltimore Ravens, led by MVP candidate Lamar Jackson. So maybe OBJ steps up. Oh, wait, that's right. OBJ is also dealing with some injuries. So Rashad Bateman really flies up the depth chart from potentially the 4th pass catcher on this team to the #2 pass catcher behind Zay Flowers. And truthfully, it's a good scheme, because even though Zay Flowers might be the #1 target going forward in this Mark Andrews absence, Zay Flowers' yards per route run and yards per target are very much like Zay himself, short. So when you talk about the deep shots that Todd Monken likes to take, when you talk about stretching the field, the guy that's going to be really threatening that mid to deep level of the field is going to be Rashad Bateman. And it really only takes one monster play from him to really bust open a good fantasy game. And you're not really counting on him getting 8, 9, 10 targets. He can deliver on 2 to 3 big time plays. Also, his snap share has been massively up over the past few weeks. In the last three weeks, his snap share is 74%, 79%, and 80%. First off, in week 11, when he hit 74%, that was his first time over 70% all season. And now in week 13, it was 80%, which is the first time hitting 80%, I believe, in the past year and a half. So despite the issues that Rashad Bateman has had, whether it's been the drops, whether it's been the injuries, he has stayed healthy. He has been a crucial part of this Ravens offense over the past few weeks. His targets in week 13 tied a season high. So I think going into this fantasy playoff run, as the Ravens are obviously, they're competing. They're a team that really wants to get that #1 overall seed. They lost it to the Miami Dolphins in week 13. Since they were on bye, but they should come out and I think get a couple good wins. Obviously, they want to get that first round bye if it's up for grabs, with the Kansas City Chiefs dropping a couple really bad games recently. So, they're going to be wanting to put up points. They're going to be wanting to win. They're going to be a team that is going to push the ball, and Rashad Bateman should be an integral part of that offense and could be a deep sleeper that you should keep on the end of your bench, especially in deeper leagues for fantasy football. So those are the 7 guys I really wanted to talk about. Just some options. Again, if you either deeper leagues or if you have a larger bench, these are guys you can throw on. I need to clarify and give a disclaimer. This is not, I know I come out on here on YouTube and TikTok and tell you guys, hey, this is who I like for this week. Going into week 14, these are not guys I'm going to start in my lineup. These are not guys that I'm telling you need to start this week. These are guys that I'm saying you can stash on your bench and have like a 10 to 20% chance to be league winners if things break right for them. So if you have that extra spot, go ahead, make them a speculative stash. So that's going to wrap up the video for today. A little bit of a shorter one. Let me know if you agree with these guys, if you think they could be league winners. If you have your own personal league winners, throw those down in the comments as well. As always, I'll post the shorts later this week. So I know a lot of people are starting their playoffs this week, or maybe it's the last week before the playoffs, however your league is structured. So these next few weeks are going to be crucial, so I'll definitely be on top of it with those shorts come Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, helping you hopefully win some chips. But until then, guys, take care.